Hey guys, so I'm working on a game here, and I just wanted to show you guys how you'll be able to skip from one scene to the other scene, how to load up basically how to load up another scene and load your main character into that scene, and then once you're going back to your previous scene, um, just how to load that character into that previous scene at a certain location. So, for example, you may load a scene when you're entering a house or a building, and then you want to, once you're exiting the building, you want to load the character basically at the front of that building. And the way I've created it, I've made it very independent, and so you can create multiple versions of this because I've made prefabs out of it. And this is basically now the main controller along with the spawn manager. So I'm going to show you a quick example of what I mean. This game is really about this bowling alley right here. And so if I enter it, see I load into the bowling alley. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but I load into it about like right here. And that's the point that I set of where I want to load into it. And if I go back out, once it loads, you see I'm right outside of it. And so we're gonna get into the code, and I'm gonna show you just how this works. And I apologize, I'm being a little quiet. I do have my son sleeping, and I really want to make this video, and I don't want to wake him. So let's get into the meat and bones of how this works. To make this work, I've created three scripts mainly, and this is just a startup script because I have a startup scene which I'm in right now, and all it is basically the logo, and then a script with this spawn manager, and then on the camera the startup script, which just waits about 5 seconds. Yeah, it just waits about 4 seconds, and it loads the main level with everything built. So if I load it up, I'll show you. Yep. And the player spawns here. Let me show you. There's a default spawn point, so this is like the first point that he would spawn in the scene. And so this here is self-explanatory. And the leave scene, I'm going to show you what this is as well. This is basically just a script you drag and drop, put an on trigger on it, so when you enter a house or when you're leaving the house, you create a little trigger and just kind of it destroys the character and loads the whatever scene you want to load. So the previous scene in this case. I'll show you that in just a second. So just create a default point for where you want the player to spawn initially in your game, just for the first point. And it is important to have the startup. Why? Because this here, it's a do not destroy, and it's a singleton, and you want it to load in the startup. You don't want it to load in any of the other like scenes. You want it to load in the scene that will never be loaded again unless the game restart. Okay. And to create a singleton, there's many tutorials out there, but basically you create basically a construct of the class, and you make sure that you just set it to private, and so the only way anyone can access anything that's inside of this would be to call this share. So shared instance, what I named it. And then obviously on wake, if it already exists, then it will delete it. Otherwise, if it doesn't exist, so if it's null, then this will become the new shared. So that's just basically how you would create a single thing. You just need this on wake, and then make sure that the name of the script, the class itself, just make sure you set it, and then right here you see it's private. That is about it for that. So you can see here that I have a on level was loaded, So what that means is the level index 0, 1, 2, 3. When it loads, if it's more than 1, then we'll be on 2, this, which is the bowling scene. I just call it B1. So if it's the bowling scene, in the bowling scene, and I'll just show you really quickly, there is a spawn here in the bowling scene. So what that means now is if we're in the bowling scene or any other scene, so when you create more scenes, just create a nice little empty placeholder and call it spawn here, and this will work for all of them. You just create a temp basically location, and you find that object and you set it, so spawn here, and then we spawn the player in, the default player. And again, this is the default player, it's public. So on the prefab, this game manager here, you see that the player will always be in there, so you spawn the player in and out. And then that's it for that. So now if you're on scene 1, which is the main scene, I'm checking to see if the player has entered any houses yet. But if he hasn't, then his new set point has not been set, which means he needs to spawn at the default location, which is a function. But if he has, then you have to spawn at the new set location. And this here, I'll show you what that does. It's simply set spawn a vector 3. And so when I call this, I set this to true, and the new spawn location is called spawn location. So when I call this function here, all I'm doing is spawn the player at the new spawn location and then setting this back to false. So if he enters another house, that will happen. And here is how that works. Hopefully you guys are still following me. I can always start from scratch if you guys are not following me. So I'll load up this scene here, right? And let's see, let's find a good spot. Let's find a good spot, like right here. I've created a prefab, and this just spawn point. Bring it onto the scene here. Let's just turn on the mesh, and then there's a out. Turn this on as well. So on this script, on this scene here, let's rotate it about 90 and just put it like right here, right? And then as for this, bring this out to about there, and then we'll hide the mesh and hide the mesh. See that the on trigger is checked and it has the spawn point, and you tell it what scene to load when you touch the trigger, which is the bowling scene. So what is in this script? Very simple. The spawn out position, basically we're getting the child object and we're setting it as the spawn out position. So where to spawn out once you've loaded into the scene and you're coming back, right there. That's where we're gonna spawn out. Simple. And so we just get an on trigger, and if it is the player, destroying the player, we're calling our singleton object that's on our object that will not be destroyed, setting the new spawn out position. So set spawn, which is what happens here. So now that the spawn is set, we set this to true, and this is now the new spawn location. And then we'll load the scene. And you know that once we load the scene, the on scene was loaded, get triggered. We're gonna be at this point where we find the temp, find the spawn here, and we spawn it at that set location in that scene, which I'm gonna save this because I want to show an example with that. So that is what this scene, have our trigger here to leave with the leave scene on it, but this. So once we load into this scene, it finds this location to spawn us there. And we can move this and put this wherever we want it to spawn. But back to this scene. I mean, this one. And this. So what happens next then is, for when this is not set, that means you've just loaded into this scene, nothing is set, so we need to spawn at the default location, which it calls this, and this basically find that default point, same thing, find this point and spawns us into it. So if I play right now, this will not work. We will not spawn any characters will spawn in here. See, nothing spawns because it's at the startup. You run into some issues if you don't, because what happens really is when right here, where is it? Right here, actually, the on wake, when the singleton is loaded into a scene that it already existed in, there's a small little like overlap. So at some point, the spawn location, even though it's set to true and it's set to the new location where you need to spawn the player, at some point it'll register at 000 instead of what it should be. But if the prefab or the singleton is never in the scene to begin with, it basically just loads itself in, and then all the data transfer over really nice and smoothly. So that's why you want to go to a startup scene, load it in there. It won't be deleted. Have it load the first time, and then you'll never go back to this scene. So you'll be all set. So if you see now, I spawn here in this location, the default location, but you guys saw that I set one up right here just a minute ago. So if I go into here, it should load me into the bowling scene if I can get up there, right? And if I go back out, it loads me right outside the house. And see, that's the default location down there. There's a new location. And also, I can go to the previous location, because the set location, or the little setter that I use, if I can get my mouse over here, the set point is now set back to false. So I can go ahead and now set a new point. Although I didn't change the point, it's just a little checker, that's all it is. The point is still registering back down there as the part for me to exit, but you know that as soon as I touch the trigger that's right here, as soon as I touch this trigger and I am the player, it's going to destroy me. It's going to set the new position to the child object position, and you can see here that the let's see, spawner, not that one but this one, out. Let's go into here, spawner, this one is right here, and the out, the child position is right there. So literally, if I wanted to create more scenes and link them up with more houses, I just, you know, drag another prefab of this out, right, and then put the new scene that I wanted to load there, and every time I come back out of that scene, it will put me at the child spot where I want to spawn. So super simple. Let's go back to the game and I'll show you if I just hop into it. I mean, I only have 3 scenes. I'm gonna keep loading into this scene, but then when I go back out, I'm accurately back next to the cop car. All right, hopefully this was helpful for someone. But if you guys need some more details, definitely just leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe, let me know, and I can go a little bit more slower, go a little bit more in depth for you. But anyways, let me just show you the script for now, and you can go ahead and pause the video and just take a look at it and see if you can just understand it if I didn't, explain it full enough. And yeah, I mean, I know I'm being a little low because I can't talk too loud, but yeah, so you don't need this. We just need to make, oh, yes, no, we definitely need that. I didn't realize, yeah, the I enumerator, definitely part of the collections. So you need the system engine, Unity engine, and the scene management. This is just, waiting for 4 seconds then to load the scene. Done. This is what I use to leave the new scenes. So when I'm leaving the bowling alley, just another trigger on the door. Again, need the scene management for this to happen. So trigger if I'm the player, obviously I'm gonna destroy myself, and then just load the new scene because I'm gonna spawn into that scene anyways. And then this is just a little spawn point, the prefabs that I've made. So this is the prefab. This is also, doesn't really have to be prefab, but this is the one that's do not destroy. And so on this here is just another public string where you can tell it which scene to load into, and then this is basically the child object that's on it, and then just find that game object transform child 0. So if you had 2 child, this would be the first element, the first child. You can have multiple spawn point and maybe make it random. It's cool. Then the on trigger when I'm trying to enter into a building to load another scene. If I'm the tag with the player, destroy myself, and then set my new position for when I'm coming out by setting it in the shared instance here of this singleton, so it will not change, it will always be there, and then load the scene. And so when I'm coming back out, that shared instant will work. And then we have this. Let me look through this because I don't think I need, yep, we don't need any of these. I was doing some other stuff with that, but all we need is that. Reference to the class, set it private. You could have made it private here and then, do a getter and setter other way, but this is just a one-liner. I find that easier. The public game object, so the default player is just the player that I have attached to it. The player I'm going to spawn as a prefab. So the player never really starts in the scene, he gets spawns in. Default spawn point for when there is no point set when I load the scene for the first time where I'm going to spawn it. Vector 3 of the spawn location is basically the new spawn location when you're coming back, and just a boolean of to check a little checker to check if that spawn location is set. A public function, so when you call the spawn manager dot shared instant dot set point from this, we can pass in a new point for where your player is to spawn back out, and just set it here. Of course, when the script starts, when the game starts up, you just want to make sure your instance is the only instance in the scene. And then there's an on level was loaded Unity function that's called whenever a level is loaded. Not the first one. The first level, like the startup, is never called. That's just the startup level, but any level you load after that, or even if you go back to the start, then this is called. So I'm just printing my coordinates here. It's not necessary. I'm just checking if because it's the value that's coming back is an integer, so I'm just checking if my level is more than 1. So since I have 3 levels, this will be the start doesn't count, and that's 0, 1, 2. So this will be level 2, obviously, if it's more than 1. And I just create a temp position, fine, the spawn here and then spawn the character there. So when I entered the bowling alley, found that little game object that said spawn here and spawn my character there. And then you can move around that spawn here game object in that scene that you're loading. In my case, the bowling alley, you can move it around anywhere in the scene. And that's where he would spawn when he entered that scene. Then we just check to see if he goes back to the main city, which is actually level 1. And while we're in that city, we're going to check if his spawn point has been set. Basically, if he's entered any building, it is set. If he's not, then we should spawn him back at the default. So when this scene actually loads for the first time, when you're coming from the startup scene into level 1, this will be false, and then we'll just load him, spawn him at, this will be false, which means we'll spawn him at the default spawn point by finding that default spawn point object and then using this location. Otherwise, we'll be coming out of one of those houses, one of those scenes, or the bowling alley in this case, which means we should spawn him at the new point that we had set. Spawn location here. So then we call spawn at selected location, which calls this, and we then spawn at that location and then set this back to false. And that's it, guys. Hopefully hopefully you guys get it. If not, like I said, shoot me an email. I can probably make a better video, but everybody's sleeping and I don't want to wake them. All right, bye-bye.